remember back in the day when I was a kid that I used to love 1001 Nights. I don't know, do you know the book? It's those Arabic tales. And I remember that I'd bug my father to read from it every night. My father would read, but he would skip a lot of parts because he'd say that they're not child friendly. And he was right. But that was the interesting part. Anyways, I remember there was this story. It was about, I've forgotten the details, but it was about this guy who was foretold that he shall kill a specific kid. And he was really devastated and he didn't want to kill a kid. So he decided to run away from his fate. And he went on an island, started living there. Ended up meeting a woman. They started living together. But they either ended up having a kid or she had a kid. He had no idea that that's the foretold kid. And one day there was this dagger hanging on their wall. And he ended up pushing it accidentally and killing the kid. So, even though he tried to run away from his fate, he just ran into it. And that concept has been terrifying to me. And I know it's not just to me, it's to most people. That's how we got the story of Oedipus. But how does this look like in real life? Well, today's story got something like that going on for it. It all started in China and consequently Korea. But before I get into the details, we need to rewind a little bit. Hi, I'm Dusky Talks. Here I talk about anything to do with culture or history that caught my attention and that I felt like sharing with you. And now for today's story. First, I will need you to imagine that you are part of a Korean family and you have decided that you're going to be moving the tomb of your ancestors. Why? Well, it could be for different reasons. Maybe there's a construction going on and they need those tombs to be relocated. Or you have decided that you can find a grave that has better feng shui for your ancestor. I imagine that you're approaching the situation with a lot of respect, care. And yeah, you might be a little bit concerned. You're going to be digging up a dead body anyways. But what you're not expecting, let me tell you, is a mummified body. Why? Well, you're in Korea, not in Egypt. And here mummification doesn't work in accordance to Confucianism. Now, Confucianism expects no harm to be done to the body and for it to be let to decay naturally. So I imagine that in the beginning, when people started discovering mummified relatives, they would have been quite puzzled, perplexed, maybe worried. Is the ancestor mad at them? What's going on? Why are they like this? And today we're going to deep dive into the reasons. Mummies in Korea. That's the topic for today. The period of time we're covering is the Joseon Kingdom. I feel like if you have seen any of my previous videos, you're kind of aware of the Joseon Kingdom by now. I talk about it a lot. Now, another thing that you may already know concerning the Joseon Kingdom is that they were Confucianists. What happened? The previous kingdoms participated in practices related to Buddhism and some aspects of shamanism, but the last Buddhist kingdom had fallen out of favor. Buddhism had fallen out of favor, and now it was time for Confucianism. And so Korean people turned to the teachings of prominent Neo-Confucianists. So one of the Neo-Confucianists was a guy from China. His name in Chinese is Chua, but since we're going to talk about him in relevance to Korea, I'm gonna call him by his Korean name, which is Chua, so that there is no confusion here and there. Okay, so Chua had this book called Chuja Kare. Chuja is, his name and title. Ka means family and Re means ritual. So this book was like a guide to a proper Neo-Confucianist on how to live their lives. Now I should emphasize that, as I've told you before, the people who would be most affected by Neo-Confucianism were the noble people. Not that the people of the lower strata of the society weren't concerned, but the rules were less tight, or there was more wiggle room. Now what exactly happened? Chuja had proposed in his funeral section. He had proposed that people should use a mixture of lime, sand and clay to seal their tombs. Why? Because, as I said, in Confucianism, it was very important for one to leave the body unharmed and let it naturally decay. Unharmed. Do you know how many grave robberies were happening? So Chuja had thought about it and he had decided that this particular mix would be the best in terms of the fact that it's not grand and from stone, because Confucianism promoted frugality, and so the previous practices with lavish grand stones and huge coffins just didn't make sense, and so it would be in a sense less expensive, less flashy, smaller, and it would also keep a person from getting their grave robbed. So it sounded perfect. what Chua and anybody else at the time didn't know is that it's going to result in the creation of something that they would have been terrified of. Mummies. Because as you can guess, mummies are not something that you'd consider a natural decay of a body. It's kind of the opposite, right? So now, before we hop to the present day and learn how people found out about them, because it was a whole mess, I must emphasize that there were two types of lime soil mixture tomb situations. Let me explain. In one of the cases, people would have one wooden coffin where the person is. Then they would stack up clothes around the coffin and put it in a second wooden coffin. So 2 coffins with clothes in between. And they would seal those things up and cover them with lime soil mixture and then put charcoal around the area so that charcoal prevents moisture, and then they would put soil. And then there was a second type of lime soil mixture burials that didn't include the second coffin, the second wooden coffin. So you'd have one wooden coffin, lime soil mixture, charcoal, soil, the end. Now, both resulted in mummifications. I'm going to explain why later. But the one that had the double coffins resulted in better mummies. Now let's hop to the present day. The discovery of mummies in Korea is kind of a recent event, and they had been discovered prior to the 2000s, but people usually just reburied their ancestors and they would let them decay naturally and everything. They didn't give them to science. The only people interested in those mummies at the time were researchers who were interested in the clothes. So they would go to such cases and places and just get the clothes donated so that they can be added to the database of clothes from the Joseon period, which is very important and very interesting, but they wouldn't touch the mummies. Now, the reasons for that could be various. Maybe the relatives of the person wanted them to have a peaceful burial and didn't want them to be donated to science and researched. Some could argue that it's disrespectful to the body. As I said, in Confucianism, it is a taboo to harm the body. So imagine donating it to science so that somebody does an autopsy on this ancestor of yours. There could be other reasons, but for one reason or another, it is what it is. That's what happened. Mummies started being researched around the 2001 to like the early 2000s. And we have better technology in current times, so we don't actually need to cut anybody up. Scans could be done, or just minimal harm to the bodies could be done and still have research carried out, which is amazing, lovely. And so we have more mummies donated to science, and now we know more stuff, which is fascinating. And yeah, that's pretty much the situation surrounding the mummies and the public perception of them. It has improved, so to speak, throughout the years, but 2001. This was very recent, so to speak. In terms of science, this was very recent. So from what I could gather from all the research carried out to this point, a lot of questionable areas, a lot of things that still need research because it's so fresh, so to speak. But we have learned some things by now. What we have learned is potentially how the mummification occurred. Let me tell you. So apparently this lime soil mixture in contact with water, and given the airtight space that I described to you, would create heat and just mummify the body. Now, scientists carried out research on mice. They recreated the whole scenario with mice, and that's how they, in a way, confirmed that that's how things occurred. And it was very interesting reading articles from before that research and from before that time period, because people were like, we imagine that possibly it's the lime soil mixture, but how could we know? It was really interesting. It's so cool seeing something being unknown and then people doing research and discovering it and confirming it. I don't know, I really liked it. Anyways, so that explains the mummification, and that's why I'm saying that Mr. Chua wouldn't have been happy at all to know that his proposal, his idea went from something that he thought is just going to prevent grave robberies into something that's well-created mummies. But now I've been blabbering about how important the mummies are for research. What exactly research? What can we learn from them? Oh, it's fascinating. As I already told you, the clothes. That is amazing because now we not only have clothes in descriptions by authors, we have them preserved. This is grand. It is wonderful. But besides that, the mummies themselves carry a lot of information about what diseases plagued the population at the time, which is invaluable information. Through some of the mummies, we have learned about hepatitis B and about all sorts of illnesses that plagued people at the time, and that is really interesting, important, and people still carry out research on the matter. Now, I didn't want to make this video without mentioning at least some of the stories of some of the mummified people so that we do not forget that they were humans with stories. I chose 3 stories that made an impact on me while reading them, and I believe you'd find them to be interesting as well. First is the story of young Te. He unfortunately died at the age of 31, very young, leaving a wife and his unborn child. People, apart from his mummified body, found a letter from his wife to him. The letter reads, "To one's father. You always said, 'Dear, let's live together until our hair turns gray and die on the same day.' How could you pass away without me? Who should I and our little boy listen to, and how should we live? How could you go ahead of me? How did you bring your heart to me, and how did I bring my heart to you? Whenever we lay down together, you always told me, 'Dear, do other people cherish and love each other like we do? Are they really like us? How could you leave all that behind and go ahead of me? I just cannot live without you. I just want to go to you.'" Now, you know how I've been telling you stories about Confucian men and their women, they weren't really in love, or the men had concubines and things. And this letter really, however sad it was, just restored my faith in love a little bit. Yeah, unfortunately, his wife and the child probably didn't live a very happy life, because just a few years after the death of young Tae, there were the Imjin Wars, which is an invasion of Japan onto Korea that were devastating, horrifying, and so they probably had pretty harsh lives. But at least his wife and their love remained in history. And I guess what we can do about it is remember them. Now, the second story is not going to be more cheerful. We're talking about people who passed away. But it is of a child. The boy was around 5 or 6 years old. And unfortunately, he passed away so young. And yeah, something that we got from this situation, this very, very unfortunate situation, is information about how children's clothes at the time looked like. It's very rare. We had them only described in texts, and so people were very fascinated with the fact that we now have physical evidence of what children's clothes look like. Now on to number 3. Again, quite the rare situation. People discovered a mother, and they discovered the child inside of her. She had died during giving birth, and what was rare for her situation and for her case is that she got preserved with the child inside of her, which apparently is very rare. And yeah, there are many more cases, and each of them holds a story. So I hope through the research that people continue doing, we get to learn more about those people and how they live their lives, and that we get to be closer to them and remember them, which I believe is quite important. Nobody wants to be forgotten, I'd imagine. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you really much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.